So welcome back as we continue these disciple-making tool videos. And in our last session, we talked about what is most true about us, our true identity, who we really are. Remember, we talked about how I'm lavishly loved as I am, I have a sufficient supply for everything I need, and I contribute to my unique and meaningful purpose. And that's what creates the engines of love and of peace and of joy in our lives. Listen, you and I both get to live into our true identity whenever we trust God's view of reality and we trust His control over it all. But you and I know that's not where we always live. So that brings us to our compulsive identity tool. And it really helps us better understand what actually drives my behavior. If this is who God says I am, and this is what I'm able to experience when I'm in my right mind, what causes me to go to my wrong mind and to lose my mind? That's the reason why I've placed right back here in the middle of this triangle, mistrust. Whenever I mistrust God's unlimited view of reality and I mistrust God's control of it, and instead I trust my own limited view of reality and I trust my control over it. By the way, how's that working out for you? Probably the same thing with me. So here's what we find. Our story begins in Genesis 1, just like Adam and Eve. It starts in pure goodness that's there. And oh, by the way, all of that garden experience is already embedded in you right now. It's never, ever left you evaporated, okay? However, we know there's something else that drives us, and I just call this our compulsive identity. And it's kind of Adam and Eve's journey from Genesis 1 over into Genesis 3 where something gets broken, all right? And this, again, is a pattern for our lives. So let's begin with the first thing that happens in Genesis 3. So the serpent comes to Adam and Eve, and for the first time in their lives, they're introduced to this thought that they should compare themselves to someone else. So the serpent says, listen, you should be like God. Well, they were like God. They just weren't God, okay? But for the first time ever, this idea is introduced to them to compare themselves to someone else. Whenever that happens, you and I are going to seek approval. It sounds so bizarre, doesn't it? Adam and Eve end up seeking the approval of the serpent, of all people, okay? And so anytime you and I are trying to be like someone else or something else, it will always result in this very thing right here, in shame. Shame says, I am not enough. I mean, every day of our lives, we all regularly ask this question, am I enough? And what does the answer normally come back? No, I'm not enough. There's something flawed. There's something defective about me. I've felt that many, many times in my life. In the midst of a lot of success, I've felt like something's still not right with me. Had nothing to do with things I didn't do. Had to do with just who I was as a person. And whenever you and I are driven by shame, we'll always seek more approval. Now check this out. There's nothing wrong with getting more approval in your life. But whenever you think I need more approval in order to feel better about me, then you know the engine of shame is driving you and is your internal driver. And it really helps you understand what drives your behavior. So that was true for Adam and Eve. It's true for you. It's true for me. Let's look at the second thing. Then the enemy comes along. The serpent comes along to them. They're in Genesis chapter 3. And he says, God's holding out on you. You see that one tree over there? I know He told you He's given you everything in this garden, but that one tree over there He told you not to touch, God's holding out on you. If you can eat from that tree, you're going to be better off. What does that have to do? That has to do with the temptation of assets. Assets, where I feel like I need more of something. Sometimes I feel like I need more money. Sometimes I feel like I need more friends. Maybe sometimes I feel like I need more sex. Sometimes I may feel like I need more facts or more friends in my life. That's what assets are all about. So the enemy comes along and says, hey, he's holding out on you, okay? So you need to do something about that. So their temptation was around assets, just like earlier, their temptation had been around approval. Well, guess what drives assets? The engine of that is fear. Fear says, I don't have enough. Shame asks the question, am I enough? The answer is always no. Fear asks the question, do I have enough? Do I have enough facts, friends, whatever it might be, fun going on in my life? And whenever the answer comes back no, then you and I are going to be tempted to obtain more of this. Now again, just like with approval, is there anything wrong with having more assets in our life? Absolutely not. However, I know it's moved to the unhealthy side in me is whenever I think I need more assets in order to be okay. Because what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to compensate for this. And then we see a third interesting thing happen, which, by the way, back with approval, driven by shame, they initially go, what do they initially do? They initially walk away because they feel a disapproval. There's a shame that's going on. Then they try to hide, right? What are you hiding behind? What kinds of things that you think tend to bring you security, you're really hiding behind? And then we see Adam and Eve have to cover themselves up because what's going on? There's guilt. Guilt asks the question, have I done enough? Or have I done the wrong things? Shame asks the question, am I enough? Fear, do I have enough? Guilt, have I done enough? Or have I done too many of the wrong things? So the way this comes out in terms of temptation has to do with achievement. Achievement, again, there's nothing wrong with achievement, but when I need more achievement in order to feel better about me, then I can know that that is being driven by the engine of guilt right there. Does that make sense? So, which of these three tends to be kind of your default or primary position? Is it shame, or is it fear, or is it guilt? Now, if you're anything like me, I go, well, actually, I got a combination of all three of those things cooking in my oven, okay? Well, I understand that, and yet we all basically have a primary position in this, and we have a secondary position. I'll tell you what mine is. My primary position is shame. I have to work all the time against this temptation of approval in my life. And then my secondary position is down here. I often feel guilty I'm not doing enough, and I've got to achieve even more. My wife, Crone, operates out of, she has to battle with approval, but her secondary one is around assets. I need more of something in order to feel better about myself. So again, these are the three primary things that drive our behavior. Oh, and wait a minute. You know what happens over in Luke chapter 4? Jesus gets himself drug out into the wilderness, and Jesus has the same three honking temptations given to him. The enemy says, hey, you throw yourself off the top of this temple and people will applaud you. You'll be the most popular person in all the world. Then Jesus gets tempted around assets. Hey, you're hungry, right? Aren't you starving to death? Your dad's not taking care of you. He's holding out on you. Turn these limestones into bread. And then we see out there Jesus stands up, the enemy takes him up to the very top of the mountain so he can see, all the world, all the universe, and says, here's what I can offer to you. Where he encourages Jesus to take a shortcut when it comes to this so he can feel better about himself. Now we know in Jesus' case, he ends up withstanding each of these three temptations. Now here's the reason why I bring this up. That's not only true for Adam and Eve. It's not only true for Jesus, but it's true for you and I. Actually, I've come to understand that you and I can boil all of the primary temptations of our lives and better understand what are the things that actually drive our behavior day in and day out around these three things. Shame is when I don't feel like I am enough and I have to get more approval. Fear, when I don't feel like I have enough, I need more assets in my life. And then guilt, when I don't feel like I've done enough or I've done too many of the wrong things and I need to achieve even more good things in order to feel good. I'm living into this compulsive identity whenever I mistrust God's unlimited view of reality and His control of it. And here I end up trusting my own limited view of reality and my control over it. So let me encourage you today to think about which one of these three things you tend to operate out of. And what would it look like for you to sit alone, still, quiet, in the presence of God, and go, God, show me more about how this tends to operate in my life and show up in my life. And then how can I turn around and live into what is most true for me? So guess what? Every one of these three things around the true identity tool are the antidote for all three of these things. Learn to better trust, live into, and experience your true identity.